Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kata Beilin, Faculty Director of Latin American, Caribbean, and Iberian Studies Program here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I have a pleasure to welcome you to the last talk in the series on science and technology in the Hispanic world that our center prepared together with Holt Center for Science and Technology Studies. This series is also sponsored for the Center for History and Environment. So right now, I would like to say thank you to all the sponsors. And I have the great pleasure and honor of introducing our today's speaker, Birgit Muller. Professor Muller is Research Director at the Centre National Recherche Scientifique, and also a professor at École de Haute Études des Sciences Sociales in Paris. Birgit published widely on economy, politics, and agriculture from anthropological perspective, and for the last 10 years, she has been working in Nicaragua and Canada in agricultural settings. Her current research explores how farmers, soil, and seeds make out in the new global conjunctures of climate-smart agriculture. She attempts to understand local everyday practices of farmers as they struggle with supralocal processes and discursive practices that connect local life worlds into farming settings, which are very different. And today, her talk is titled Facing the Environmental Mission, Small Farmers in Nicaragua and the Agroecological Challenges in Neoliberal Food Regime. Please help me welcome Birgit Muller.
Thank you very much, Kata, and thank you very much all for attending that lecture and for inviting me. Of course, I would have preferred to come over and give the talk in person, but we can do this maybe some other time, I hope. Anyway, I'm going to take you to Nicaragua today, and to Nicaragua and into the World Wide Web, both at the same time. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys and partager l'écran. Oops. Voilà. Partager l'écran. Hop. I don't want to partage this. No. Hey. The wrong thing is shared here. This way. Okay, so you can see my PowerPoint, huh?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So I would like to take you to the rural community of that I call El Guanacaste in the northwest of Nicaragua, in the hills close to the little town San Juan de Limay. And this little village, which is actually which used to be actually pretty inaccessible or not easy to access. The first time I went there, I had to cross a river with my car, and it was actually quite a frightening experience because there were no bridges to cross that river, and only cars with a high sort of thing could cross it. And in spite of this relative remoteness, this Guanacaste has lots of experience with development projects. And some of them have been bringing agroecological methods to this place for decades already. And it was there actually that I first heard about permaculture in 2009. And this was even before my daughter got into it, which is, who is now a permaculture designer. And one of the farmers showed me a caracol, a snail-shaped raised bed, where he had planted herbs and vegetables. and told me that this was part of a permaculture design he was applying on his farm. On my second day in the village, the villagers were building a collective compost heap called bokashi, which is a sort of Japanese idea of doing compost with encouraging microorganisms. So lots of development projects came and went to El Guanacaste, and they encouraged farmers, for example, to do farmer-to-farmer exchanges, de campesino a campesino. They were transporting farmers to other remote communities to exchange planting materials and seed. And even the FAO chose El Guanacaste as a showcase for its special program for food security, making women plant vegetables in lorry tires placed on scaffoldings so that the goats that the project also brought would not destroy them immediately. The idea that FAO came with was also farmers should connect to market, although this village was really mostly practicing subsistence agriculture, and there was not much left that they could possibly have brought to market. The various projects that brought these agro-ecological cultivation methods did not address the big ranchers, however, the hacienderos, but exclusively the smallholder farmers. And so these smallholder farmers, well, they took what they liked and they left what they didn't. And so some of the ideas had a lasting effect, and others disappeared again. So these lorry tire idea, for example, was not living a very long life. What all these projects, however, had in common was that they wanted to improve the availability and quality of food in the village. The project with the persuasive name Taking Roots that arrived in 2014, however, was different. It was about planting trees, and not fruit trees, but a certain type of tree. The region that where El Guanacaste is situated was actually covered in dense tropical forest at the beginning of the 20th century, until it was occupied by settlers and then by ranchers who got title to the land and regularly burnt it to keep the forest from re-emerging. Most of the land is still today occupied by ranchers. Smallholder farmers only occupy pockets of the land that they had been able to buy or rent, or that they had been able to hold on to since the Sandinista land reform of the 1980s. Also, the reforestation project mainly involved smallholders, as the hacienderos' use of fire was incompatible with growing trees. Using fire has been forbidden, is even legally forbidden, but it is still, it can only be done every, I think, 5 years, but it's used much more often on the pastures. In this paper, I will explore the new digitalized governance scheme that the tree planting project brought to the village. Projects of advancing and commercializing environmental services have been studied and criticized for more than 20 years. The bundling of nature into tradable bits of capital, numerous critics argued, has led to alienation, privatization, and displacement. So in order to consider carbon markets as an effective policy tool, a basic premise is the fungibility of all emissions to carbon. This exchange gets, of course, more complex when fossil fuel, so dead carbon emissions, are allowed to be offset by living biological carbon, for example, living trees. Or when it is assumed that such a thing as net zero emissions resulting from an offsetting equation can have a real positive effect upon the atmosphere. Carbon as a new metric makes its way into all dimensions of social life and emerges as a new commodity in the form of carbon rights. This new form of property rights to sell and benefit from reducing emissions is a crucial issue in the context of having markets play a key role in climate action. The emergence of carbon as a new form of individual property right and the trading of carbon rights signals a long-term move with major social and economic implications. In this paper, I would like to go a step further and show how most recent developments in environmental service schemes go beyond the neoliberal developmental governance based on the idea of resilience, participation, and self-help, and how it reintroduces, in fact, authoritarian measures of direct surveillance and control. The Canadian not-for-profit NGO Taking Roots has been in San Juan de Limay since 2010 and is cooperating with the Nicaraguan not-for-profit organization Agro-Ecological. Taking Root contracted 740 manzanas for reforestation in San Juan de Limay. Now they are in their follow-up phase, which will last 10 years. So for the farmers around San Juan de Limay, 3 contracts were possible. One called Cercos Vivos, which is sort of trees planted around pastures on fields paid by the kilometer of trees. So it's just the, you know, the contour of the pasture that the producers would look after. Then the other form is silvopastorales, which allow for pasture cattle there for the first 3 years of the project and then no longer. And then the third form is compacto, where food crops can be planted under the trees for the first 3 years and then no more. In exchange for keeping the trees growing and sequestering carbon from the atmosphere, the farmers receive direct payment over a 10-year period from the sale of the corresponding carbon credits. The producer is paid for the work done in the plantation, planting, fencing, cleaning 3 times a year. But in the years when he can harvest wood by pruning, in the 5th year, or cutting down certain fast-growing trees like mandagual, he does not receive any payment. So the commercialization of the carbon credits ties the non-profit sector tightly to commercial certification agency, and through them to big multinational corporations eager to green their image. Carbon sequestration services are marketed by Taking Roots and sold directly within Canada and through companies in Sweden, Germany, Switzerland, England, and the US and Spain. So in February 2021, Taking Roots announced that its community tree project was actually included as one of the solutions in the portfolio of carbon removal projects recently announced by Microsoft. So you have actually El Guanacaste tied to Microsoft. The portfolio is part of Microsoft's commitment to remove 1 million metric tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The Community Tree Carbon Program presents itself as the largest reforestation initiative in Nicaragua. On its website, on its website, it claims it helps farming families to grow native tree species and build forest-based enterprises on underused farmland that has been historically deforested, creating sustainable livelihoods for the long term. So I just wanted to show you here the scheme for the compacto scheme. So you have you have a row of trees that alternate, that are allowed to grow for more than 10 years. And then you have a row of wandaguals that are planted every 1.5 meters. And these can be then cut after 5 years to give more light to the remaining trees. And this is how the plantation actually looks after 10 years. So you can see there is actually no possibility of growing anything underneath. And the people this is an image that I took from the from the website of Taking Roots as a sort of a good example of what they have achieved after 10 years. Oops. So the question that I would like to ask is, how does the intents and practices of this Taking Root project relate to concepts such as resilience that have dominated critical development discourse until recently and are still very, very prominent? So what is called in 2010, after 30 years of neoliberalism, sustainable development, or the governance of nature, is a form of disciplinary regime. So Michael Watts sees in particular the concept of resilience as a powerful technology of neoliberal governance. So the idea of this disciplinary regime is that power is exercised by disciplining people to act on their own accord as they were supposed to act. So this new type of power contributed, as Foucault has pointed out, to the emergence of global capitalism and the type of societies and productive systems that come with it. So resilience as a governance technology of biosecurity expresses and makes compatible a form of autonomy with various environmental and economic risks. Biosecurity, or more accurately, biopolitical security, refers to a vast arsenal of technologies put at the service of managing and organizing risk, resilience, and threat as part of the regulation of life processes. Biosecurity is about retooling culture, local community institutions, indigenous knowledge, and individual behaviors, and adapting them precisely to the logic of the market, business, and its organizational theory and networks. So my question is, are these new schemes that are introduced in Nicaragua by well-meaning NGOs of payment for ecosystem services part of the exercise of such a power, or are they actually a much less subtle form of power that is about to emerge? Are we returning actually to the panopticon that Foucault wrote about? I will now take you to directly into San Juan de Limay, and which I visited last in 2017. So when I got in 2017, after a pretty rough ride with my little rental car, to the office of the organization Taking Roots, that was organizing the reforestation projects, and it were then I was lucky. The door was open and I walked in. The administrator welcomed me, and he was immediately ready to answer my questions. And to begin, he hooked into the internet and gave me illustrations for his explanations. Most of the information his office is organizing is stored in the cloud, and the office works constantly connected to the internet. Randolph carries an extremely fancy smartphone of the last version connected to a satellite. The platform he is using is FarmTrace. FarmTrace is a spin-off company from Taking Roots that the founder of Taking Roots developed in collaboration with PhD students from the University of British Columbia Forestry Department, combining machine learning, remote sensing, and forestry statistics. I'm sorry, my PowerPoint is not very smooth. I can't see what the next slide is because I'm in the full screen mode here for you guys. The platform is not to be used by the smallholder farmers themselves, but by the organizations they work with. So here you have the smallholder farmers. Let's just take my mouse here. The smallholder farmers. Here you have the technician with his smart iPhone. He takes the information from the smallholder farmers, puts it into the cloud, and this cloud is also fed by drones and satellites, and what that is, I don't actually know. Voila. So the farmer goes, walks the field with his mobile phone, and delimits the boundary of the contracted field, and then measures the carbon potential of the specific trees that are uploaded to the cloud and geolocalized. And the data collected then in the field is triangulated with satellite data. So you have the field measurements here, and then the satellite measures. The satellite takes an image of the field every 10 days and creates a stack of overlapping images. So unusable images are discarded by the algorithm, and the algorithm learns progressively to approximate the carbon content of the assigned spot in the field, and then progressively learns to calculate the average carbon value of the parcel, which can then be determined without even visiting the field. So also the traceability of the producers is pretty complete. And although the website of FarmTrace pretends that farmers can now acquire satellite images over their farms without the need for expensive consultants, of course, in my case, this is not true. They don't ever get to see these satellite images. But the producer is traceable and allows the person, the organization that pays for the ecosystem service, and so that they can compensate for their own environmental destruction, to follow whether the producer is fulfilling the contract and looks after his plantation. So every year when payment is due, a representative of Taking Roots goes out into the plantation and takes samples on 6 spots on the plot and measures the carbon captures. His fancy smartphone is connected via Bluetooth to a GPS, which allows to localize precisely the spot of the farmer. Also, the technician himself is entirely traceable and geolocalizable. Each time he visits a contracted field, he takes a picture of himself, sends it to the cloud, and geolocalizes himself. So on his phone, he has an app with all the participants of the project and their profile, which is updated each time he visits the plantation, or when payment is made according to the fulfillment of the contract and according to the carbon price contracted. So if less carbon is captured, less money is paid. The price paid depends also on the carbon price contracted with the beneficiary of the compensation scheme. So if the, let me see. So, so if the price, the carbon price would be $10, the producer would get $6 and the organization $4. So this can be actually pretty profitable if that scheme is actually spreading out. And it is pretty ambitious. It now wants to actually create a scheme for the world's 500 million smallholders. The businesses contracting carbon schemes come mostly from Europe and very little from Canada. Some clients have even come to visit the area and were satisfied to see that their payments actually bear fruit and that the plots are exactly where announced and in the state they were promised to be, thanks to the tracking mechanisms. On the website, FarmTrace promotes its platform as a brilliant sales tool that has attracted interest from all over the world. I quote, "Things that used to be invisible now become visible. More bang for your buck." For the producers, the technician in San Juan de Limay said, planting trees is more profitable than growing maize and beans. Some producers tried to cheat, like a big rancher who contracted 80 manzanas, had them planted with the trees the project gave him, and then burned down the plantation to make space for pasture for his cattle. He claimed it was an accident and replanted, but the following year, he burned the plantation again. So if a producer voluntarily destroys a plantation or harvests it prematurely, he should pay all the expenses of the organization. This producer did not pay anything, as he had good relations in the municipality. We learned a lesson, Randolph said, not to contract too much land with the big guys. When I visited the village, the farmer, this is one of the few remaining old growth trees in the village, and you can see how majestic they are and how big they actually used to be. Today it looks different. There are actually many trees have indeed disappeared, and so I was curious to see how these plantations would look in reality, and I accompanied one of the farmers that I knew from previous visits to his new plantation of climate crops. So he had he was allowed to grow 5 tree species: Sinicero, Madero Negro, Caoba, Pochote, and then Manduaval, which is the fast-growing variety, which is cut after 5 years. The trees had been planted sort of 5 years previously, and their crowns already touched, and it was pretty much impossible to grow anything under the trees. But when we returned from his field, we actually crossed a piece of land which had been forested before, and so as he needed space to grow a crop, he had cut that forest down to plant his maize and bean. So actually, this project, when it is applied to small holders who really have only few land, it actually, in his case, just pushed the problem further away to a different plot that had to be that was then used for planting crops. I also went to a field with a bigger landowner who had 50 manzanas in the village, and he had committed 7 of them to the reforestation project. I was asking him whether it was competing with his food production, and he told me that he had other areas where he could grow a crop. For him, the problem was that the reforestation project was actually competing with his second generation natural forest, where he preserved certain trees that he appreciated very much because he could use their fruit as a cattle feed. So he actually had his cattle pasture under the trees, for example, under the guasimo. And he had Leucaena and Vanilla. And he had to argue with the technicians because they wanted him to cut down already established trees that he thought were useful, but they were not among the 5 tree species promoted by the project. He showed me the Paraguay tree that grows along its fence line and grows fast, the Nichihuiste that grows slowly but has an extremely hard and resistant wood, excellent for fence posts. The Jícaro sabanero, excellent for frescoes and containers. He showed me a tree that he calls Piñón, that he bought as a seed, as a seed from El Salvador, and that he multiplied there. He showed me the marango that the cattle love. He wanted to preserve the Laura de Quebracho and the Huiviste. This is his farm. And under his trees actually grows a plant called engordedor de caballo that the cattle like, but that doesn't really makes his plantation look clean. So in actual fact, he lets his cattle graze under the trees, under the newly planted trees, as soon as they were getting a bit stronger. And his forest does indeed look more diverse and forest-like than the plantations of the other farmers. I tried to find out more about the rights and obligations of the producers, and I went to see Leonardo, who used to be the one who brought the permaculture projects to the village. He explained, he was now working for the reforestation projects, and he explains the project from the project's point of view. So the project and the landowner, he said, enter into a contract that defines rights and obligations. For example, burning the land and grazing livestock in the forest is prohibited. If the forest owner is caught with a surprise visit, he can lose his contract and will have to pay back everything that the project has invested in him. I asked him if the land is mortgaged to the project, as some producers actually feared. He only laughed and he said, the contract is with the person who holds the title of the land, and a copy of the title is given to the project. But it's good if the growers think that the land is being mortgaged to the project. They will take better care of the trees. As he put it, the project helps growers to be independent, which means they can earn more money if they do the work themselves. If they use paid labor, they don't have much left. Fulfilling the contract is the priority of the project, says Leonardo. The landowner can't do what he wants. He actually, interestingly enough, compared the trees to a borrowed pair of shoes. He said, if I lend you my shoes for a year, I want to make sure you don't use them too much. You don't get stuck in the mud, you don't destroy them by stepping on stones, because I want them to come back in the best condition possible. So in fact, the seeds of the trees that the project donated to the farmer to grow become a way to control them via the trees that need to be taken care of. The farmers then are no longer the masters of the piece of land where these trees grow. For me, this is very similar actually to the effect that intellectual property rights on seeds have on farmers who use them, or in the Schweizer case, when seeds carrying intellectual property rights entered into his fields, and then with them a whole governance structure that rooted there with this seed. In the case of taking roots here, at any time, customers can go to the specific piece of land where the carbon is being captured for them and verify the reality of their investment. Here, for example, we are on the farm of Daniel Alvarado Mendes, where I was just talking about, the one who has committed 7 7 manzanas of land to the project. And now we are going to visit his parcel of land. This is, I hope my computer can do all of these things. Oh, wow, yeah, he can. So here you see, this is his parcel of land. They are calculating how much carbon he has captured, how many trees he has planted, and we can see the details here. Okay, so you have the monitoring data. You can see how many trees he has planted, and you could even see, well, he's planting, of course. So but actually there are less and less trees on his parcel. So you see, the ones had planted because some of them are then disappearing again over time, and others are growing bigger, as you can see in this graph here. Anyway, there are other functions still that one can access, but it's a bit complicated. Here you can see how many visits he received from the technician in the last year, how many farmer meetings there were, and parcel evaluations. And then I can't see it because it's covered up. You can see the days since a technician last visited the plot. And this is something then that the people paying for carbon credits can actually access. Go back to my PowerPoint. Bon. Anyway, so thanks to GPS, investors in carbon credits can no longer, at least theoretically, be deceived about what is happening in their investment. But you can see that a living forest becomes something extremely schematic here. The logic between donation and carbon investment also seems clearly different. So the owner receives training and then must perform the work according to the project specification. So if the owner does not do the work in the plantation properly, the project's extension agent can organize actually workers on her own and pay them directly on the field of the farmer. The forest owner only receives what is left over. So I asked about the years when the owner receives nothing for his work, such as the 5th year. How much will he get for the pruned wood in the 5th year? There was no information yet on the amount of payment and the use of the pruned wood. The experimental wood-fired reactor that apparently would have emitted very little CO2 and produced charcoal, now called biochar, that was set up in San Juan de Limay, actually exploded and almost set San Juan de Limay on fire, emitting huge clouds of black smoke. I wondered how much this project would actually contribute to carbon capture. The project consists of turning the cut wood into charcoal to be sold in supermarkets for backyard grilling, or as or to fulfill the biochar promise, which is an upcoming project of taking roots. So how much carbon is actually ultimately stored and emitted is unclear, really, in spite of all these sophisticated calculations. So once the 10-year contract is over, the owner can do with the trees what he wants, let them grow for his children to harvest, cut them down little by little, let the forest turn into a wood where new young trees and undergrowth develop, clear cut the whole plantation, everything depends. So the challenges of adapting to the radical Yeah, so the challenges of adapting to the radical uncertainties and disruptions of global climate change seem to produce in that project a new sense of homo economicus. The Nicaraguan peasant, according to Foucault, becomes an entrepreneur of himself, a kind of hedge fund manager for his own impoverished life. So if one takes so this vision of El Guanacaste via satellite and via tree measurements of the sort we saw is a sort of is like car headlamps that light a particular spot and leave all the rest in the dark, such as the field that Chungo now cultivates to compensate for his loss of his initial agricultural land, which he had converted into a tree plantation. Anyway, so if we go over to calculating and comparing all nations and economic activities in carbon units, it really seems that we are becoming blind to requirements in ecology and society at the same time. Thank you.